You ever have that moment where you're standing in your own front yard, coffee in hand, sun just peeking over the rooftops, and you think, this is the American dream? Maybe you worked for years to buy this house. Maybe you saved every penny, skipped vacations, and finally got the keys to a place you could call your own. But then, just as you're about to take that first deep breath of freedom, you spot it. A crisp, white envelope tucked under your doormat, stamped with 3 little letters that can turn any homeowner's dream into a waking nightmare. HOA, if you've never tangled with a homeowners association, let me paint you a picture. Imagine a group of your neighbors, armed with clipboards and a rule book thicker than a Texas brisket, patrolling the streets in golf carts, ready to pounce on the tiniest infraction. Maybe you left your trash can out an hour too long. Maybe your grass is a 1/4 inch too high. Or maybe, just maybe, you dared to plant a sunflower in your front yard without written permission from the board. Welcome to the world of HOAs, where the rules are many, the logic is questionable, and the consequences can be downright absurd. Today, I'm going to walk you through 10 HOA rules that will make you want to move out immediately, and trust me, by the end, you'll be checking your own neighborhood's bylaws just to make sure you're not living in a suburban police state. These aren't urban legends. These are real rules, enforced by real HOAs, and they're enough to make even the most patient homeowner consider packing up and heading for the hills. Let's start with a story. Picture this: a quiet cul-de-sac in a leafy suburb. Kids riding bikes, dogs barking, sprinklers hissing in the summer heat. Now meet Linda. Linda is a retired nurse, a grandmother, and the proud owner of a 12-inch garden gnome named Sir Reginald. Sir Reginald isn't just any lawn ornament. He's a family heirloom passed down from Linda's mother, who brought him over from England in the 1960s. For years, Sir Reginald stood guard over Linda's petunias, a silent sentinel in a sea of green. But one morning, Linda found a violation notice taped to her door, unauthorized decorative object. It read, "Remove immediately or face a $250 fine." Linda was stunned. She called the HOA president, a man named Carl, who wore his sunglasses indoors and referred to himself as the enforcer. Carl explained in no uncertain terms that garden gnomes were strictly prohibited under Section 4, Subsection B of the Willow Creek HOA bylaws. "We have to maintain neighborhood aesthetics," he said, as if Sir Reginald's painted smile was a threat to civilization itself. Linda fought back. Of course, she attended the next HOA meeting, gnome in hand, and pleaded her case, but the board was unmoved. "If we let you keep your gnome, what's next?" Carl asked, "Flamingos? Wind chimes? Chaos?" In the end, Linda was forced to banish Sir Reginald to the backyard, out of sight, out of mind. The message was clear. In this neighborhood, individuality was a punishable offense. That's just the tip of the iceberg. Rule number 1: no personal decorations without approval. Sounds harmless, right? But in practice, it means every wreath, every flag, every potted plant is subject to the whims of the board. Want to hang a seasonal banner for your kid's birthday? Better submit a request in triplicate and wait 6 weeks for a decision. Want to celebrate your heritage with a small flag? Not unless it's on the approved list. I've seen HOAs fine people for displaying holiday lights before December 1st, or for using non-traditional colors in their decorations. One family in Arizona was fined $500 for hanging a string of blue lights during Hanukkah. Because blue wasn't on the HOA's list of festive colors, imagine being told how to celebrate your own holidays in your own home. Rule number 2: strict lawn maintenance requirements. Now I get it. Nobody wants to live next to a jungle. But some HOAs take this to extremes. I once spoke to a homeowner named Mike who received a violation notice because his grass was 35 inches tall. The maximum allowed? 3 inches on the dot. Mike measured it himself, but the HOA's lawn inspector insisted on using his own ruler. When Mike protested, the board threatened to hire a landscaping company to mow his lawn and bill him $200 for the privilege. In another case, a woman was fined for having dandelions visible from the street, not a field of weeds. Mind you, just 3 lonely dandelions growing between the cracks in her driveway. The HOA sent her a photo as evidence, circled in red like a crime scene. Rule number 3, no parking in your own driveway. Yes, you heard that right, some HOAs ban overnight parking in driveways, insisting that all vehicles must be stored in garages. The logic? Driveways are for aesthetics, not storage. I met a couple in Florida who had to park their car 2 blocks away every night because their garage was full of boxes after a recent move. When they left their car in the driveway for one night, they woke up to a $100 fine and a warning that further violations may result in towing at owner's expense. Imagine paying for a house with a 2-car driveway only to be told you can't use it. Rule number 4. No clotheslines or outdoor laundry. This one is a classic in the name of neighborhood appearance. Many HOAs ban clotheslines. Even the retractable kind I heard from a single mom in California who tried to save on her electric bill by hanging her laundry outside. The HOA sent her a cease and desist letter, citing unsightly personal items visible from the street. She was told to use her dryer, even during rolling blackouts. The irony? The HOA newsletter boasted about the community's commitment to sustainability. Rule number 5. No unapproved paint colors. Want to repaint your front door? Better hope your favorite color is on the HOA's approved palette I've seen. Lists with only 5 options: beige, taupe, light gray, darker gray, and eggshell. One homeowner in Georgia painted her door a cheerful yellow, only to be ordered to repaint it at her own expense. The board's reasoning? Yellow is too attention-grabbing. Because nothing says community spirit like a row of identical beige doors. Rule number 6, no personal security cameras. In an age where porch pirates and break-ins are on the rise, you'd think a neighborhood would welcome a few extra security cameras. But not in some HOA communities. I spoke to a veteran named Tom who installed a small doorbell camera after a package was stolen from his porch. Within a week, he received a violation notice. Unauthorized surveillance equipment. The HOA claimed cameras disrupted the uniform appearance of the neighborhood and could invade the privacy of other residents. Tom tried to argue that the camera only faced his own front steps, but the board wouldn't budge. He was forced to remove it or face daily fines. The kicker? The HOA itself had installed cameras at the entrance to the subdivision, but apparently only the board was allowed to watch rule number 7, no children's toys or sports equipment, left outside. This one hits home for a lot of families. Picture a summer afternoon, kids playing basketball in the driveway, a couple of bikes leaning against the garage, maybe a soccer net in the yard in some HOA neighborhoods. That's grounds for a violation I heard from a dad in North Carolina who got a warning because his daughter left her pink tricycle on the porch overnight. The HOA's letter called it visual clutter. Another family was fined for leaving a basketball hoop at the edge of their driveway, even though it was on their own property. The board's logic? Sports equipment detracts from the neighborhood's curb appeal. The message is clear. Children are welcome, as long as they don't act like children. Rule number 8, no political or social signs, freedom of speech. Not if your HOA has anything to say about it. During election season, many homeowners like to put up a small sign supporting their candidate or a cause they believe in. But in some communities, any sign, political, social, or even a welcome home banner for a returning soldier can be banned. I met a woman named Priya who put a "Support Our Troops" sign in her flower bed while her husband was deployed overseas. The HOA ordered her to remove it within 24 hours or face escalating fines. When she appealed, the board cited a rule against all non-approved signage. The irony was thick. The same board that sent out newsletters about community values was silencing the very voices that made the community unique rule number 9, no feeding the birds or wildlife. You might think putting up a bird feeder or tossing some peanuts to the squirrels is harmless fun, but in some HOA neighborhoods, it's a punishable offense. I heard from an elderly couple in Colorado who loved watching the finches and cardinals at their feeder one day. They received a letter from the HOA. Feeding wildlife encourages pests and disrupts the ecosystem. The board demanded they remove all feeders and threatened daily fines for non-compliance. The couple tried to explain that the birds brought them joy, especially during the long winter months, but the board was unmoved. The feeders came down, and the yard fell silent. The couple told me it felt like losing a piece of their home rule number 10. No personal gardens or vegetable beds. This one might be the most infuriating of all. In the age of farm to table, you'd think growing your own tomatoes or herbs would be encouraged. But in some HOA communities, personal gardens are strictly regulated or outright banned. I spoke to a teacher named Marcus, who built a small raised bed in his backyard to teach his kids about growing food. The HOA sent him a violation notice: unauthorized landscaping. The board claimed that only approved ornamental plants were allowed, and vegetables didn't make the cut. Marcus tried to appeal, arguing that his garden was neat, well-maintained, and hidden from the street. The board's response? If we let you grow tomatoes, what's next? Cornfields? Marcus was forced to rip out the garden, and his kids learned a hard lesson about rules that make no sense. Now, you might be thinking, surely these are just isolated incidents. My HOA isn't that bad. But here's the thing. These stories aren't rare. They're happening in neighborhoods all across America, from gated communities in California to quiet cul-de-sacs in Georgia. The rules are written in dense legalese, buried in 100-page documents that most homeowners never read until it's too late. And the boards enforcing them? Often they're just neighbors with a little too much time on their hands and a taste for power. But let's step back for a moment. Why do HOAs exist in the first place? The original idea was simple: protect property values, maintain common areas, and create a sense of community. In theory, it sounds great. Who doesn't want clean parks, well-lit streets, and neighbors who care? But somewhere along the way, the mission got twisted. The rules became less about community and more about control. The board meetings turned into battlegrounds, with homeowners pitted against each other over the color of a mailbox or the height of a fence. Contrast that with the neighborhoods where people look out for each other, where individuality is celebrated, and where the only rule is be a good neighbor. I've seen communities where front yards are filled with wildflowers, where kids' chalk drawings decorate the sidewalks, and where the only violation is not waving hello. These places exist, and they thrive. Not because of strict rules, but because of mutual respect. So what can you do if you find yourself trapped in an HOA with rules that make you want to run for the hills? First, know your rights. Many states have laws that limit what HOAs can enforce, especially when it comes to things like political signs, solar panels, or even the right to dry your clothes outside. Second, get involved, attend board meetings, ask questions, and don't be afraid to challenge rules that don't make sense. Remember, the board works for the homeowners, not the other way around. And if all else fails, sometimes the best solution is to vote with your feet. Life is too short to spend it fighting over the color of your front door or the height of your grass. There are plenty of communities out there that value freedom, individuality, and common sense over conformity. Find one that fits your values and don't look back. But before you pack your bags, take a moment to look around. Is your HOA really protecting your investment, or just making your life harder? Are the rules building a community, or tearing it apart? The answer might just make you want to move out immediately. Let's take a step back and look at the bigger picture. Why do these rules exist, and how did we get to a place where a garden gnome or a tomato plant can spark a neighborhood crisis? The answer, as with most things in life, is complicated. HOAs were born out of a desire for order, for a sense of pride in where we live. But somewhere along the way, the pendulum swung too far. The rules that were meant to protect us started to feel like shackles, and the people enforcing them, well, sometimes they seem more interested in power than in community. Let me tell you about a man named Harold. Harold moved into a brand new subdivision in Nevada, excited to start his retirement in a quiet, friendly neighborhood. He loved to tinker in his garage, fixing up old motorcycles and teaching his grandkids how to change the oil on a dusty old Chevy. But within a month, Harold received his first violation notice: unauthorized use of garage as a workshop. The HOA had a rule that garages could only be used for parking cars, not for hobbies or storage. Harold tried to explain that he wasn't running a business, just spending time with his family. The board didn't care. Rules are rules, they said, and threatened daily fines. If he didn't stop, Harold's story isn't unique. Across the country, HOAs are enforcing rules that go far beyond keeping the grass green and the sidewalks clean. They're dictating how people live, what they can do, in their own homes, and even how they spend time with their families. I've heard from parents who were told they couldn't set up a kiddie pool in the backyard, from artists who were ordered to remove a mural from their fence, and from veterans who were fined for flying the American flag on Memorial Day, the common thread. A sense that the rules are less about community and more about control. But here's the twist: not all HOAs are created equal. For every horror story, there's a tale of a board that actually listens, that works with homeowners instead of against them. I spoke to a woman named Denise who moved into a small HOA community in Oregon when she wanted to plant a pollinator garden in her front yard. She expected a fight. Instead, the board invited her to present her plan at the next meeting. They asked questions, offered suggestions, and ultimately approved her project. A year later, the neighborhood was buzzing with bees and butterflies, and other homeowners started planting their own gardens. The board even updated the rules to encourage native plants and sustainable landscaping. Contrast that with the story of the Johnson family in Texas. They wanted to install solar panels on their roof to save money and reduce their carbon footprint. The HOA denied their request, citing aesthetic concerns. The Johnsons appealed, pointing out that state law protected their right to install solar panels. The board responded by threatening legal action, dragging the family through months of hearings and paperwork. In the end, the Johnsons won, but only after spending thousands on legal fees and enduring months of stress. The message was clear. In some HOAs, the rules are a weapon, not a shield. So, what separates the good HOAs from the bad? It comes down to one word: respect. Respect for homeowners' rights, for individuality, and for the idea that a community is more than just a collection of houses. The best boards understand that their job isn't to police every blade of grass or every shade of paint. It's to foster a sense of belonging, to solve problems, and to help neighbors live together in peace. But what happens when respect goes out the window? That's when you get the kind of rules that make people want to move out immediately. Rules that punish creativity, that stifle joy, that turn neighbors into adversaries. I've seen friendships destroyed over a misplaced trash can, families forced to sell their homes because they couldn't afford the fines, and entire communities divided by battles over things as trivial as mailbox design. And here's the thing: these rules don't just affect homeowners. They impact renters, visitors, even delivery drivers. I heard from a young couple who rented a townhouse in a strict HOA community. They were fined because their guests parked on the street instead of in designated visitor spots. The couple tried to explain that the visitor lot was full, but the board didn't care. Rules are rules, they said, and the fines kept coming. The couple moved out as soon as their lease was up, vowing never to live in an HOA again. It doesn't have to be this way. There are communities out there that strike a balance between order and freedom, between pride and individuality. They have rules, sure, but they're reasonable, flexible, and enforced with a light touch. The boards listen, the homeowners participate, and the result is a neighborhood where people actually want to live. So if you're stuck in an HOA that feels more like a prison than a community, remember, you have options. You can organize, run for the board, or band together with your neighbors to push for change. You can learn the rules, challenge the ones that don't make sense, and demand transparency and accountability. And if all else fails, you can move on, knowing that there are better places out there, places where a garden gnome is just a garden gnome and a tomato plant is a symbol of home. Because at the end of the day, your home should be your sanctuary, not a battleground. The rules should protect your investment, not your neighbor's ego. And the people enforcing them should remember that a community is built on trust, not fear. Let's bring this home. If you've made it this far, you're probably wondering, is it really worth it? Is the promise of a manicured lawn and a sparkling community pool enough to justify living under a microscope, where every choice you make is subject to someone else's approval? For some, the answer is yes. For others, the cost is just too high. Here's the truth. HOAs aren't going away anytime soon. In fact, more than 74 million Americans live in HOA-governed communities, and that number is growing every year. Developers love them because they keep neighborhoods looking marketable. Some homeowners appreciate the order and predictability, but for every person who loves their HOA, there's another who feels trapped, frustrated, or just plain exhausted by the endless rules and the constant threat of fines. So, what can you do if you're stuck in a community with rules that make you want to run for the hills? Start by reading your HOA's governing documents. Yes, all of them. Knowledge is power, and you might be surprised by what's actually written versus what the board claims. Next, get to know your neighbors. There's strength in numbers, and often, the loudest voices on the board don't actually represent the majority. If you see a rule that doesn't make sense, speak up. Attend meetings, ask questions, and don't be afraid to challenge the status quo. Sometimes, all it takes is one person, willing to stand up and say, "This isn't right," to start a movement. And if you're house hunting, do your homework. Ask about the HOA before you fall in love with the kitchen or the backyard. Read the rules, talk to current residents, and trust your gut if something feels off. It probably is. Remember, you're not just buying a house. You're buying into a community, for better or worse. At the end of the day, your home should be a place where you feel safe, comfortable, and free to be yourself. It should be a place where your kids can play, where you can plant a garden, where you can hang a flag or a wreath or a string of lights without fear of retribution. It should be a place where you can live your life, not just follow someone else's script. So if you're living under the weight of rules that make you want to move out immediately, know that you're not alone. There are millions of people just like you, fighting for a little more freedom, a little more common sense, and a little more joy in the place they call home, and who knows? Maybe your story will be the one that inspires your neighbors to stand up, speak out, and reclaim their community. If you've got your own HOA horror story, drop it in the comments below. I read every single one. And you never know, your experience might just help someone else. And if you want more stories about fighting back, building better communities, and finding the courage to say enough is enough, hit that subscribe button. Because together, we can make sure that home is a place worth fighting for.